So what would you say to the parents that may find this video or are watching this right now, and they're raising kids, or looking at college, and they're looking at, schooling, public schooling, private schooling, homeschooling, and number one, they're worried, about what may shake their children's faith. Number two, they may be looking for resources, maybe a curriculum, or even just a supplemental thing, a cool website or a magazine or a podcast to listen to, something that that they could latch on to help navigate some of these waters with their own children. And then one other kind of question to that: those of us who are Christians and we raise our children learning about creationism, at some point, our kids need to learn evolution just so they know what it is and they know what is being taught. Is there a good resource for a young Christian creationist family to teach evolution to their children so that they can, understand what the different worldviews are and how they match up? I don't think any parent only wants their kids to only hear creationism all the time, and then send them off to college and hope it works out.
Right.
So maybe just some clues about navigating these things as a parent. I'm sure you get a lot of these concerns, and then maybe some resources you could recommend along the way. And feel free to plug your own products.
Well, our company mostly makes stuff.
Right.
We make the supplies that go along with the curriculum. So I won't be plugging like, oh yeah, buy my book. Although I have a book, but the Apostle Paul, when he went to Athens, I think gives us a good model for understanding how to engage in a culture and a society that might be at best curious of Christianity and at worst much more hostile to that. In Acts 17, Paul had been in Berea and established a church that was beginning to thrive. But of course, it was close to Thessalonica, and they had driven him out of Thessalonica, so they sent a brute squad to send him out. And so he leaves his team. He leaves his church founding team there at Berea, and he goes on to Athens. And Paul being Paul, right, he's not just going to sit there and twiddle his thumbs and wait. He goes to the marketplace. He goes to the synagogue. He preaches, and his preaching gets the attention of the local philosophical club, basically, the local academy. And he has the chance to present the case for Jesus as a God. And when you read the way that he presents it, it's a very different sermon than the other ones that Paul does, because he's not talking to Jews, right? So he's not going to start reasoning from the scriptures. You see that in other places in Acts. Right. He opened them and started reasoning from the scriptures. These are Athenians. They're Greek pagans. So what does he do? He starts actually with a creation component, and talks about how God had made from one man all the nations of men. So he has this clear connection to Adam and Genesis, because he has to get them to understand that all human beings are fallen, and therefore all human beings are in need of repentance. But even that, they're in need of a savior, the man Jesus Christ, whom God proved was deity by raising him from the dead. And so he's got this short sermon that we know of. It could have been longer in there. But one of the things that Paul does that's really clever in that is he quotes a couple of Greek poets, at least two and possibly three. He also talks about having been around the city and noticing that, he said, you're very religious. And the city was mentioned by Luke as being filled with idols. But Paul takes that opportunity to show, I have been paying attention to your culture. And this ties into the question you have on evolution. I'm paying attention to your culture. I've read the work of some of your people. And so I'm not coming in here as just somebody out of the blue saying, you're all wrong, and I'm gonna lay it straight for you. He believes that, and he knows that's true, but he knows that's not how you can say it. So when we look to Paul for that kind of inspiration, as we find ourselves sometimes in a culture that is antithetical to Christianity in some way, that says absolute truth doesn't exist. Truth is only in the mind of the individual, for example, a typical postmodern type of situation. Well, let's take that idea and let's see if we can actually, follow it down, do the philosopher's work of if all truth is only localized to me and you, how is it that we can even speak and understand each other? Because in order to do that, we have to have certain commonalities of truth that connect us to one another. So you can do that sort of thing. In the context of something like evolution, it is the dominant paradigm through which biology, paleontology, astronomy are viewed. So it's important for us as little Pauls, in a sense, to know what's going on in that culture around us. So, for my part, I dove whole in, right? Every class I took was never about Christian perspectives on these things. It was always just, this is the way that it works, a naturalistic perspective on evolution. So I would say for the parent who's interested, but also concerned about evolution, like, what do we do with this? Don't be afraid to pick up just a standard biology textbook. You can get them cheap online. Like thriftbooks.com, we live there in the Ross household. We go there all the time for good used books, and you can get great textbooks, because after something's in a new edition and it's no longer being published, it's fine. Grab it and take a look. And you can do that with college textbooks because, sometimes the high school textbooks don't talk about evolution very much. So you could start off with something like the college textbook. They're always going to have at least one chapter dedicated to evolution beside the thread of evolution that might weave the other chapters in. But they'll have at least one solid chapter going over probably somewhere around 5 or 6 major evidences for evolution, similarities of organisms in terms of the bones that they have compared to other things, what we call homology, molecular evidence, the fossil record. They're going to be talking about geological dating evidences or things like that. Don't be afraid to grab one of those and go through it with your kids at whatever pace works for their age. Don't be afraid to watch the Discovery Channel National Geographic specials. They're really good. I remember for us, as we're homeschooling some of our kids, the first time that my wife picked up a typical earth science book for the public schools, like what I would have grown up using. And she had been homeschooled and hadn't really used those very much. And she looked at it, she's like, this is really good. Like, this is really well done. This is really superior to a lot of the other resources that I have. I said, yeah, that company right there, Prentice Hall, they're like the top science publisher in the country, and McGraw-Hill's right next to them, and they make great stuff. And just because it disagrees with me on certain, even very fundamental components about whether or not the natural world is all that we can know through the means of science, or we have to limit ourselves in some way, doesn't mean that there isn't still great value in those books. They're bringing us truth from God's world, right? Yeah. It's his truth. It might be packaged wrong, but still open up the package and look, and you will find God's truth in there. And then you can talk about the ways in which things are interpreted. You can go on to other creationist books or websites. There's 3 really well-known major creation organizations in the United States. You've got Answers in Genesis, the Institute for Creation Research, and Creation Ministries International. So just shout out to those 3 if you're interested in a young Earth creation perspective. If you think the Earth is really old, then you're probably going to be drawn to Reasons to Believe, run by Hugh Ross and his organization, or there's the Intelligent Design folks through the Discovery Institute. Those would be the biggest places that you would go if you were skeptical of Darwinian evolution or the age of the Earth or things like that. And their resources are pretty extensive, whether it's a question about genetics or origin of life chemistry, or paleontology and the fossil record. You're going to have at your fingertips, more web articles than you can shake a stick at. So you just might get one of their things like the Answers book, or you might get a geology book. There's some really good ones that have been published out there, some of them at some different levels. So you might be able to get something for the little kids, and you might be able to get something for that high schooler that you're thinking, okay, we're about to go into college. And so thinking about that part of, what do you do to train now so that when they're released, they're going to be able to thrive? A couple of things, because really what we've discovered is that most of the kids that are abandoning Christianity are abandoning it well before they get to college. College is the point where it becomes public that they've abandoned their Christianity, or the last vestiges are shed. But it happens earlier. You got to keep an eye on their social media. And that seems tough because you don't want to be that parent, right? You don't want to feel like you're the police. But if you train your kids to love what is good and what is right and what is noble and what is just, um, then policing the social media stuff becomes a little bit easier. But it's so invidious, and if you don't know the last 5 websites, the top 5 websites maybe that your kids look at, you really don't know what they're doing online, and that's dangerous. That's very, very dangerous. You cannot give the internet to a kid with no safety on it. So, for example, we have a program that filters out websites and things like that. But we also put our computer in a public place in the house, not because I don't trust my kids, but I don't trust humans. Right? We are all fallen. So even those of us who are walking a path in redemption towards the goal of being Christ-like can waver on that path. So it's a protection for me. It's a protection for my wife. It's a protection for all members of our family. Those are things that can help us. And if we know that our kids are getting into chat room groups and Instagrams, things and stuff like that, we can start to see the signs early before they metastasize into something much more dangerous. So that's one of my pleas is just know what your kids are doing online. And that's going to involve you being bothersome at times. And then from the content area, you start off with things like what I just mentioned there. Here are some places you can go. There's really good apologetics websites out there if you're interested in those. And then there's also other places that are just going to present you with information from the world and not try and spin it too much in any particular direction. Our family got a subscription to World Watch, which is run by World Magazine, is a Christian magazine. And maybe some of our parents know and remember, oh yeah, my parents got World Magazine. Well, they have a daily news program. Every day, 10 minutes of news. They've got a main anchor, and they've got a couple of probably students, mostly from other schools, that are interning and doing work, learning how to be news anchors and things like that, doing this. And they're on site and location, green screen stuff. But is there a bill in front of Congress right now? Yeah. And well, what is the bill? What do the Democrats think about it? What do the Republicans think about it? What are its chances of being passed right now? Just from kind of a top look. They're not going to get in the weeds of what all the implications of that are or why everybody's fighting so much. But what I like about it is that I don't have a newspaper subscription. Newspapers aren't culturally important to us the way that the web is now. And so this is a way for my kids to get an idea of what's going on in the world. Like there's stories about what's happening in Kazakhstan over something and, what's happening in the UK. So there's this global focus, there's this US focus, and there's always this, at the end, I like how they end it. They say, whatever the news, the purpose of the Lord remains. And it's just one of those great daily reminders that we can't get caught up sometimes so much in the goings on of the world around us, but it's good to be aware of what they are. Be like Paul, know your surroundings, and know where you stand within them so that you can present yourself, a living sacrifice to those people around you. So those are the things that I would think, as kids growing up, don't be afraid to explore ideas that even sometimes seem a little bit dangerous. We have to know what they are. We have to know where they are intersecting truth, because all ideas pretty much have some connection to truth. Even the really bad ones become popular for a reason. They might become popular because of fear or other sorts of things, but there's a reason why they end up taking hold. Be willing to explore why that might be the case, and that will help your kids learn the critical thinking skills. So in colleges across the country, everybody wrings their hands and they're wondering, how do we help people do critical thinking? Well, it doesn't happen on a test. It just doesn't. I mean, you can write a question that's sort of okay. Critical thinking happened to me every day because I went to my classes and I learned about things and I wasn't sure what to do with them. Here's this evidence for the ancient age of the earth, or here's this evidence for biological evolution, or here's this evidence that the Bible wasn't written the way that you Christians say that it was, to take a different example, right? All of those things are things that I might learn in today, and then I have to go back to my dorm room and I have to try and sort it out. And if I just put it to the side and say, I'm not going to worry about that, you might be able to do that for a little while, but you can't do that forever. Sooner or later, those things start to eat at you. Your mind, God created us in a world in which there is rationality because he is a rational God. And so we're going to try and make sense of the little bits and pieces of the world that we learn about and try to put it together into something that makes a coherent whole. And so critical thinking happens when you think hard. And you can train your kids to do that sort of thing. You're listening on the radio and there's a news report about something that happens. You say, so why do you think somebody decided to do that? Somebody robbed a bank. Why do you think, what are some of the reasons? There could be a lot of them. Explore with your kids what it is. Follow up with an extra story about that. Why would somebody, make this argument on a Discovery Channel program? What do you think is behind the way that they view the world? And just get kids used to thinking critically about that so that when they go to college and you're not around anymore, you have trained kids who can listen to the professor, not to be critical of the professor, but to be able to critically analyze what they say, which is ultimately what I hoped. If a student is in my class and he's like, listen, Dr. Ross, the only reason that you think this is good evidence is because you hold to this position over here. Well, good. Now you've understood a little bit why I think this might be good evidence. And they might say, I think it's really lousy evidence, or you got a whole bunch of holes in it. And I want to hear that. I want to hear that from my students. I like that challenge, not so that I can put them in place, but so that I can help them continue to make that development. If they go to a public school or a lot of private, secular private schools, there's going to be a lot of philosophies and ideas that do not comport with biblical Christianity. And there's a lot of things that we talk about in our churches that might not even comport with biblical Christianity sometimes, right? We got to be careful about what we think biblical Christianity is. But, the aspects that Christ laid out for us of serving the poor, tending to the weak, mercy towards people, love, that, as Paul had said, I could have all these things, and if I don't have love, I'm nothing. And this is someone who contended hard for the faith. So you're not talking about Paul who's going to be so squishy about love that he can't tell somebody the truth. But he also knows that one must have compassion. So, when you get to a school and you find that nobody has compassion for anybody else, that the fighting is just bare knuckles or brass knuckles, you as a Christian cannot follow in that. That is following after the world. If this campus group is in some sort of war with this campus group, or the students are at war with the faculty are at war with the administration is at war with itself, how do you learn to walk with Christ in the midst of that war? And look for places in which you can serve, heal, and speak truth. And I don't have a formula for that. So, that's where every generation is faced with different things. I grew up in the 80s and 90s and got my undergraduate and graduate degrees in the 90s and 2000s. And the things that I was facing, the types of arguments that I was facing are different. Now we have different kinds of arguments, and it's going to be up to people my age and older and people my age and younger to figure out what are good Christian responses to those. But the way that we walk out the Christian faith still remains the same. And it might be little argument differences and different styles and approaches, but that call to love, to serve, to proclaim, those are going nowhere, right? Those are just staying with us, and they're staying with the church. When you're at a school, and if you're a Christian student, you need to be attached to a church, not the campus fellowship. I mean, get attached to them as well, but your priority is the church. And that's because, like here in Woodbridge, the church has got a range of people in ages, people in different walks of life, people of different ethnicities and backgrounds, people who have walked out Christianity in a wider variety of ways than you as any one person ever could. And so take the counsel as wisdom, right? That broad wisdom is great. In college, everybody's 20 years old, broke, and eating pizza. I mean, it's not bad. Well, the pizza's not always good, right? But you've got ladies in the church that have served for 50 years. You've got ladies in the church who have had their first kid now, right? You've got men and children, and it's the whole community of God is right there in a way that it is not. American life is highly age segregated. Going through the public schools, I was always with kids my own age. And yeah, they're brothers and sisters, and hanging out and that, but we were really locked in. I mean, think about, those kids that are in high school right now, if they're watching, right, you're a junior. It means something to be a junior. It means something to be a freshman. You've gotten to high school, man. It means something to be a senior. You rule the world. Nope. Right. Those levels mean something. And then you go to college. And the levels mean something there as well, freshmen, juniors, seniors, and everybody's about the same. And then you get dumped after that into the work world, and nobody's the same age. It's like, why did we keep everybody the same age all the time? Going to church draws you back towards reality. That, one of the things I remember, because every once in a while, my wife and my kids would come to school. It wasn't very often, but if they had to drop something off for me because I forgot, they would come through, and college kids are astonished to see children. Not because they don't exist, but we never see them on a day-to-day basis on a college campus. There are no children. That's weird. For a human society, over the thousands of years since God has created man, that is weird for people to not see children or older folks for so long a period of time besides their teachers and their peers. So getting out from that campus is cathartic. It's helpful. And putting yourself in a holy convocation of believers gets you rooted back in reality. You're going to feel like they can't relate to you because they're not 20 years old and poor and struggling with grades. Actually, a lot of them can. So lean into them, and not just for your own support, but to serve, to show yourself the discipline of humility, and go in there, work the nursery, change some diapers, or whatever it happens to be. I got a chance to work with an international student ministry. So, there's the churches, there's also campus ministry work, and figure out where your gifting is. I could teach. That was something I was good at, and something that the Lord allowed me to continue to develop and train. I was not great bedside manner, right? So it gets to hospitality. I wasn't always all that good with that. Work our strengths and get around others that do. So you do that, you get into the church, you get connected in. It's going to make some of the struggles that you might find at a secular school easier to bear, because there will be people to bear with you.